Imagine being sentenced to prison and ending up in a room that looks more like an IKEA showroom than a jail cell. A flat-screen TV on the wall, a private bathroom with stainless steel fixtures, a fridge stocked with snacks. Outside your door, there's a music studio, a fully equipped gym, even walking trails through pine forests. No barbed wire towers, no overcrowded cells stinking of sweat and concrete. Instead, it feels eerily calm, clean, almost comfortable. This isn't fiction. These places exist. In Norway and Spain and parts of Europe that see punishment not as suffering, but as a chance to rebuild. They call them prisons. But to the outside world, they look like resorts, and that's where the controversy burns. Because for many, the word prison conjures images of misery, harsh time behind walls designed to break you. The idea that someone who murdered, stole, or destroyed lives could spend their sentence in what looks like a college dorm, that feels like an insult, a betrayal of justice. But here's the twist. The countries building these so-called luxury prisons argue that harsh punishment doesn't fix crime. It feeds it. They believe comfort, dignity, and even freedom inside prison walls can turn offenders into citizens again. And their recidivism rates the measure of how many ex-prisoners reoffender some of the lowest in the world. So, are these prisons soft, even offensive, or are they proof that the rest of the world has been doing punishment wrong for decades? Tonight, we're taking you inside cells that look like hotel rooms, across islands where inmates live in cottages, and into the debate tearing across the world. Are luxury prisons a slap in the face to victims, or the key to actually fixing crime? Because maybe the most shocking prison in the world isn't the one that looks like hell. It's the one that feels like home. When people first hear the phrase luxury prison, it sounds like a contradiction. How can you put those two words together, luxury and prison? One is about comfort, the other about punishment. But in some corners of the world, especially Northern Europe, that contradiction is the whole point. The traditional image of prison, especially in the United States, is built around retribution. Do the crime, do the time. You stole, you suffer, you killed, you rot. The purpose is to strip away comfort as a way of teaching a lesson. But in countries like Norway, Sweden, and Spain, the philosophy shifts. The idea isn't to make someone miserable, it's to make them human again. The concept of a luxury prison comes from this belief that the way you treat people behind bars shapes who they become when they get out. The logic is simple. If you brutalize inmates, lock them in violent, overcrowded conditions, they leave prison angrier, more broken, and more likely to commit crimes again. But if you give them dignity, education, and skills, you increase the odds that when the cell door finally opens, they can live like functioning members of society. This approach was born in the 20th century as Scandinavian countries began rethinking punishment. They asked, what is prison for? To hurt people or to protect society in the long term? And if the goal is safety, then reducing reoffending is the key metric, not how much suffering happens inside. That's how we ended up with places like Halden prison in Norway, where every cell has its own TV, fridge, and private bathroom, and where guards are trained not to dominate inmates, but to mentor them. Or Bastoy prison, where inmates live on an island working jobs, cooking meals, and studying in classrooms instead of staring at concrete walls. These facilities are rooted in the belief that punishment is the loss of freedom, not the loss of humanity. But here's the thing, when you frame it like that, prison doesn't have to look like the American nightmare of bars and overcrowding. It can look like a university dorm, or even a summer camp. As long as the gates keep you inside and your movements are restricted, the punishment is being separated from society, not being tortured by it. And this is where the clash happens. Because to outsiders, to people who grew up in systems where prison equals misery, the sight of an inmate playing guitar in a recording studio or tending to farm animals on a prison island looks like betrayal. It feels like victims are forgotten. It feels like justice has been softened into comfort. But advocates counter with hard numbers. In Norway, recidivism rates are among the lowest in the world, around 20%. Compare that to the United States, where more than 60% of ex-prisoners are arrested again within 3 years of release. The message is brutal in its simplicity. Harsher prisons don't stop crime, kinder prisons do. So the very existence of luxury prisons forces us to ask uncomfortable questions. Is prison about making someone pay for what they did, or is it about making sure they don't do it again? Is justice about vengeance, or about building a safer future? That's the philosophy behind the luxury prison experiment. It's not about giving inmates comfort for comfort's sake. It's about using comfort as a tool, dignity as a strategy that many nations swear makes their societies safer. But philosophy is one thing, seeing it in action is another, and nowhere is that more clear than when you step into Halden prison, often called the most humane prison in the world. If there's one place that put luxury prisons on the map, it's Halden prison in Norway. Reporters call it the most humane prison in the world. Some call it the prison without bars. And if you've ever seen the photos, you'll know why it doesn't look like punishment at all. Opened in 2010, Halden sits in the middle of a forest. The designers intentionally built it so inmates would see trees, grass, and light instead of endless concrete. Step inside and you'll find walls decorated with art, music spilling from practice rooms, and a recording studio stocked with instruments. Guards and inmates eat meals together. The prison even hired architects to make sure the cells didn't feel like cages, but like small bedrooms. A typical cell has a flat-screen TV, a desk, shelves, its own bathroom, and even a mini fridge. Inmates can cook in communal kitchens, work jobs, take classes, and record songs in the music studio. The whole environment feels closer to a college campus than a prison. But this wasn't built to pamper criminals. Norway's justice system is built around a radical idea, that punishment is simply the restriction of freedom. Once you lose your liberty, the state doesn't have the right to pile misery on top. Instead, the focus is on rehabilitation, preparing you to re-enter society as a functioning human being. The guards at Halden aren't trained to intimidate, but to mentor. They go through extensive conflict resolution training, and their role is closer to social worker than armed overseer. It sounds shocking, but here's what makes Halden so controversial and so fascinating. It works. Norway's recidivism rate is roughly 20%. In the US, it's more than triple that. By creating an environment that fosters responsibility, dignity, and skill building, Halden actually reduces the likelihood that inmates will reoffend once they leave. That doesn't mean life at Halden is free. Inmates can't walk out. Their movements are tracked, their freedom is gone, and they remain under strict rules. The difference is that while they serve their time, they're treated as people with the potential to change. They're given tools to rebuild rather than stripped down until anger and despair are all that's left. Critics, especially from harsher prison systems, see Halden as a joke. They argue it looks more like a resort than a correctional facility. Victims' families often feel that seeing murderers or violent offenders living in such comfort is an insult. Why should a killer get a music studio when my loved one is gone? That's the emotional heart of the outrage. But defenders fire back with a question of their own. If the point of prison is to create safer societies, which system is doing better? If Norway's soft prisons are producing fewer reoffenders, then maybe the tough-on-crime model isn't toughness at all. It's failure dressed up as justice. Halden forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth, that punishment and safety don't always line up. Sometimes the harshest systems create the most dangerous outcomes, and sometimes dignity, the very thing many people think criminals don't deserve, becomes the secret weapon against future crime. That's why Halden isn't just a prison, it's a mirror. It makes every society that looks at it ask, are we building prisons to make people suffer, or to make sure they don't come back? If Halden feels like a college campus, Bastoy prison feels like something even stranger, a summer camp. Floating on an island off the coast of Norway, Bastoy looks nothing like the word prison. Instead of cell blocks and razor wire, you'll find wooden cottages, farm animals, and inmates riding bikes along gravel paths. Here, around 100 men live in small houses, cook their own meals, and work daily jobs tending animals, farming vegetables, repairing boats. Guards walk around unarmed. There are no barbed wire fences. At night, prisoners sleep in unlocked rooms. It sounds unreal, but this is by design. Norway built Bastoy as a model of rehabilitation through responsibility. The philosophy is simple. If you want someone to re-enter society, you train them to live like they already belong in it. Inmates shop for groceries, budget money, work 8-hour days, and live as a small community. The punishment is still clear. They can't leave the island, but their time isn't about survival, it's about practice, and it works. Studies show Bastoy has one of the lowest reoffending rates in Europe. Men leave with skills, habits, and a sense of personal accountability. Critics might call it soft, but the numbers tell a different story. Of course, to outsiders, Bastoy looks outrageous. Pictures of inmates sunbathing on beaches or playing tennis spark outrage online. That's not prison, people say, that's a vacation. But to Norway, the real vacation is a future without crime. Bastoy is their experiment in proving that rehabilitation, not retribution, make society safer. Norway may get the spotlight, but it isn't the only place experimenting with prisons that look nothing like punishment. Across Europe and beyond, countries have quietly been building facilities that blur the line between incarceration and rehabilitation. Take Spain's Aranjuez prison, just outside Madrid. At first glance, it looks like a standard correctional facility, but behind its walls, there's something unheard of in most of the world: family units. Inmates live with their spouses and children in small apartments designed to resemble normal homes. The idea is radical but simple: maintain family bonds so that when prisoners are released, they have a foundation to return to. For young children, it means they don't grow up visiting their father or mother through glass, but sharing daily life, breakfast, bedtime stories, hugs. Critics sneer that it's indulgent, but Spain argues it breaks the cycle of crime by keeping families intact. In Switzerland, prisons like Champdollen highlight the flip side. Overcrowded, chaotic, criticized for poor conditions, they force Swiss officials to rethink their system. Some facilities there now emphasize spacious rooms, counseling, and education closer to the Scandinavian model. They've learned the hard way that inhumane conditions only make inmates more violent and more likely to return. Even in Asia, some countries are cautiously adopting elements of this approach. In Singapore, for example, Changi Prison Complex integrates intensive rehabilitation programs, religious services, and skills training. While not luxury in the same sense as Halden, the idea is the same. Prisoners must leave with more tools than they came in with. These global examples prove one thing: luxury prisons aren't about spoiling inmates. They're about redefining what punishment means. Is it endless suffering in cramped cells, or is it structured dignity designed to prevent future crime? Each country's answer depends on how they balance justice with long-term safety, and that brings us back to the central controversy. To some, these prisons look like a betrayal: criminals living better than taxpayers, victims left behind. To others, they're the only model that actually works. For every photo of Halden's art-filled hallways or Bastoy's sunlit cottages, there's a wave of outrage. Critics see these so-called luxury prisons not as rehabilitation, but as betrayal. To them, prison is supposed to hurt. It's supposed to be punishment. Anything less feels like letting criminals off easy. The most common argument is simple: victims. Imagine losing a loved one to a violent crime, then seeing the killer's cell, complete with a TV, a fridge, maybe even a guitar. For grieving families, it's salt in the wound. They argue it mocks justice. Why should someone who destroyed lives live better inside than many law-abiding citizens do outside? That anger is real, and it's powerful. Then there's the fairness question. In countries struggling with poverty, unemployment, or homelessness, critics point out that some inmates in luxury prisons are eating better, living cleaner, and sleeping safer than people who've never broken the law. It feels backwards, rewarding the criminal while ordinary citizens suffer. Even within the justice system, there are skeptics. Some guards argue that humane facilities make inmates entitled, harder to control, less respectful of authority. Politicians often rail against them too, using the images of comfortable cells as proof that governments are wasting taxpayer money. In the US, where the prison system is built on retribution and toughness, the idea of luxury prisons is almost unthinkable. And there's a darker criticism too: the fear that such prisons could blur accountability. If incarceration becomes too comfortable, what's to stop crime from rising? If people don't fear prison, do we lose deterrence entirely? For critics, a prison that looks like a resort isn't just offensive, it's dangerous. This backlash keeps the debate alive. Are luxury prisons humane justice, or justice betrayed? If critics see luxury prisons as betrayal, defenders see them as the only thing that actually works. To them, the outrage, the images of inmates with TVs or guitars all miss the point. Because the real question isn't whether prison feels tough, it's whether it makes society safer. Supporters of prisons like Halden and Bastoy point to the numbers first. Norway's recidivism rate, the percentage of prisoners who reoffend after release, is around 20%. Compare that to the United States, where more than 60% of former inmates are arrested again within 3 years. That gap isn't just a statistic, it's the difference between a person rebuilding their life and going back to crime, and a revolving door that keeps victims piling up. Defenders argue, if your system is producing 3 times as many repeat offenders, then harshness isn't justice, it's failure. They also argue that harsh punishment doesn't scare people straight, it breaks them. In overcrowded, violent prisons, inmates learn survival skills, gang codes, and resentment. They don't leave better, they leave worse. And when they walk back into society, they bring that damage with them. Luxury prisons flip that logic. Instead of teaching survival and chaos, they teach skills for life: cooking, working, studying, managing money. Rehabilitation is not a soft word here. It's a strategy for public safety. There's also the guard's perspective. In humane prisons, staff aren't fighting constant riots or fearing for their lives every day. At Halden, guards receive conflict resolution training and build relationships with inmates. It sounds counterintuitive, but defenders say it makes the environment safer. Fewer fights, fewer assaults, less trauma for the officers. It's not just about inmates, it's about protecting the people who work there too. Critics argue that dignity is wasted on criminals, but defenders flip it. Dignity is what prevents future crime. When you strip a man down, treat him like an animal, you shouldn't be surprised when he acts like one, but when you treat him like a human being, he's more likely to act like one when he leaves. The punishment is the loss of freedom. Everything else should be geared toward making sure that, once free, he never comes back. Making the world safer, not just crueler. So in the end, luxury prisons force us to ask a brutal question: is justice about punishment or prevention? To some, these facilities look like resorts, an insult to victims. To others, they're the only proof that prisons can actually work cutting crime instead of feeding it. Maybe the real shock isn't that these prisons look humane, it's that the rest of the world accepts brutality as normal. And if kindness works better than cruelty, then maybe our obsession with harsh punishment is what keeps crime alive. If this video opened your eyes, hit that like button so more people see it. Share it with someone who thinks prison should always equal misery. And don't forget to subscribe, because we've got more hidden corners of the justice system to explore stories darker, stranger, and more human than you've ever been told.